Did you know your pre-approval is not the same as a qualification? Today we're going to talk about the 10 things that you should know as a buyer before you make an offer on a house. Number 1, having a pre-qual is not the same as a pre-approval. A pre-qualification means the bank has literally done nothing except for talked to you. They haven't looked at your credit. They haven't looked at your income. They haven't looked at your assets, your liabilities. They haven't done anything. And a seller understands the difference. You might not understand the difference, but the seller understands the difference. And your offer is not going to get the same priority if we present your offer with a pre-qualification versus a pre-approval. A pre-approval means the lenders actually looked at your credit. Now, that doesn't mean they have to do a hard pull on a credit. They can do what's called a soft pull. A soft pull doesn't hit your credit, won't ding your credit. In fact, my favorite lender that I work with a lot only does a soft pull to start out with. It just gives us an idea of what's really going on. A pre-approval means the lender's already looked at your income. They've already talked to you about your debt to income ratio. They've already looked at how much money you have in the bank and where your down payment funds are going to come from. It is a much stronger position to be in when you have a pre-approval than when you just have a pre-qualification. So if you want to get your offer accepted, make sure you jump through the hoops ahead of time and do a pre-approval. That's also important because in the Oregon contract, when you make an offer, you are saying, I am working with this lender. My offer is for this amount of money, with these terms, with this lender. And as a listing agent, I'm here to tell you that I really care about who the lender is. In fact, that's number 2. Your lender actually matters just as much as your agent. Because if you're working with Rocket Mortgage, sorry, I have a mortgage with Rocket, but I'm going to pick on them for a minute. Rocket Mortgage or anyone else on a big national basis, the listing agent knows the chance of you getting to closing without a hassle, without delays, is much, much lower than if you are working with a great local boots on the ground lender. One of the reasons for this is because when you work with a local boots on the ground lender, you have one point of contact. Sure, they might have a processor, they might have an assistant, but when you work with Fred, you know you're working with Fred. Although in my case, when you work with Steven, you know you're working with Steven. And your local lender has relationships with appraisers and appraisal management companies. Big national companies don't have those same relationships. And the bottom line is the appraisers don't give them priority. And you end up with more of the dregs of the appraisers than the great, amazing appraisers. So we can also have problems on the appraisal side when you don't work with a local lender. So if we're competing in a multiple offer situation and you as a buyer love that house and really want your offer to get accepted, I am here to tell you that who you work with on the lending side matters. When I represent a buyer and I can say to the listing agent, this buyer is pre-approved with my go-to lender. We get to closing every single time. We do a great job and we can close in 3 weeks. We could even close sometimes in 2.5 weeks. Now that matters on you. You have to be on top of things. You have to turn your paperwork in. You have to answer questions. You have to do things like that. But if the house is vacant, the seller's going to prioritize someone who can close sooner versus someone who can close longer. I was working with a buyer not that long ago, and they wanted to switch lenders after the offer was accepted, which we can have that happen if all parties agree. But the lender they wanted to switch was said they needed 45 business days to close the loan. That is ridiculous. And there is no world that a seller is going to pull a house off the market for a lender who needs 45 business days to close a loan. So working with a good local boots on the ground lender will help you get your offer accepted. Number 3, did you know that only 21% of transactions are first-time home buyers? And that on average, a first-time home buyer is putting 10% down, not 20% down? In fact, a buyer can buy a house today with as much as 0 down. Now, I don't love the 0 down programs. We have them. They do work for some people, but 3% conventional, 3.5% FHA, 5-10% down. Those are our really common programs, and those work really well. So you don't need 20% down to buy a house. That's one of the biggest myths in real estate, I think, is buyers say to me all the time, well, I don't have enough money saved yet. And I'm here to tell you that you are so much better off putting 3% down or 3.5% down, paying some mortgage insurance, and letting that appreciation in the house start to grow. If you wait 12, 24, 36 months, however long it takes you to save that 20% down, now that house is even more expensive than it has been. And so jumping into the market, taking advantage, locking in a house and starting that appreciation going, even if that means you have a little mortgage insurance, mathematically that makes more sense in today's market. 4, Now, your pre-approval number is not your budget. That's not how I want you to think about things. Now, you can say to the lender, hey, how much do I qualify for? Most people say to a lender, hey, do I qualify for $500,000? Do I qualify for $800,000? And they're going to come back and say, yes, you do. No, you don't. Here's what you qualify for. But I want you to think about it in a different way. I want you to think about it in a how much money per month do I want to pay on my house payment? What do I want to pay for that? So think about your budget. Think about what you're paying in rent right now or what your current mortgage is, and think about how much you're comfortable having your payment be. So maybe you're comfortable having your payment be $3,000, $4,000, $8,000, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But then I want you to work with a lender to make sure that we're showing you homes that fit your budget. I'm showing you homes that when you walk in and you fall in love, it actually works for your budget. And if you think about it that way and you know what that number is before we ever walk in the door, you'll never be disappointed that you can't buy the house or that maybe you could buy the house, but it just doesn't work. And let me tell you, being house poor is no fun at all. I don't recommend that anybody's house poor. Now, I do recommend that my first-time home buyers stretch themselves a little bit. If you're a first or second-time home buyer and you're at the beginning of your career, if you're at the beginning of everything going up, and that payment is doable right now, but it's tight, two things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is you're probably going to make more money in 2 or 3 years, right? You're probably going to make more money in 5 years. And the other thing that's going to happen probably, and I know I don't have a crystal ball and I can't promise this for sure, but interest rates are probably going to go down. Interest rates are probably going to be less in 3 years than they are today. Now, if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you they would be lower today than they are. So my crystal ball is not working, but we did hit 8 and we're only at about 6.5 today. So we're better than we were. So if you can afford it today, as your income goes up and hypothetically you're able to refinance, it will just get to be more comfortable. So it's just a situation where if you can do it now, if you can push yourself now, it will be worth it in the end. But you don't want to get into a situation where you can't go out to dinner, you can't go on that trip, you can't go away for the weekend because you have to make your house payment. That is not a way to live. And when you own a house, things break. Like your furnace dies. And yes, it was only a 5-year-old furnace, but something happened and your furnace dies. I tell buyers who have no cash, if you have no money, no extra income, no extra slush, no wiggle, don't buy a house. Even if you can afford the monthly payment and people say to me sometimes like, well, Jenny, I'm paying $3,500 in rent. I might as well be paying $3,500 in my mortgage. And there's some validity to that. But the flip side to that is if your furnace breaks or your window doesn't, I don't know, if something happens, your roof leaks, if something happens, it's a problem. Number 5, don't open new credit. Don't go buy a sofa. Don't go buy a car. Heaven forbid, don't go buy a car. Don't buy anything on credit. Don't do anything during the process that you're buying a house. My rule is until I hand you keys, it's not a done deal. I had a horrible situation. This was years and years ago, actually, where I sat down at the closing table with my buyers and they were super young, really, really nice, cute couple, but super young. And he said to me, he's like, Jenny, I'm so excited. And I'm like, great. Why are you excited? And he's like, I'm so excited I quit my job yesterday. And I just looked at him and he's like, don't worry. I'll get a new job, Jenny. It'll be fine. I'll make my payments. But what he didn't know or what he didn't understand is the lender checks your employment the day we fund your loan. So the day that everything is final, the day that everything's official, the lender verifies one more time that you still have a job. Sometimes that's actually talking to a supervisor and saying, hey, does Fred still work here? Yes, he does. Great. And that's enough for the lender. Sometimes a lender will just call and say, hey, is Fred available, please? And they'll be like, yeah, 1 minute, let me get him for you. And that's enough. So in this particular case, this kid quit his job and didn't have it and therefore wasn't able to close his loan the next day. Now we worked it out. He got a new job. We figured it out. We just delayed closing just a little bit, but don't quit your job. Don't do anything until I hand you the keys, because when I hand you the keys, that means it's a done deal. Now you can quit your job, do whatever you want. I don't care. I mean, probably don't quit your job, but you get the idea. Once you have the house, once you have the keys, it's official and you can do it. Number 6, the inspection is not a renegotiation for every single item in the transaction. That's not how it works. We negotiate things during the inspection contingency that we didn't know about when we wrote the offer. We didn't know that there was a bad sewer line. We didn't know there was fungal growth in the attic. We didn't know there was high radon. We didn't know those things. Negotiations during the inspection contingency is not for the things that we knew walking around. We knew those windows had broken window seals. We knew that concrete was broken outside and was a trip hazard. We knew that paint was chipping on the window. Now, the negotiations are things that we didn't know about. You actually have two opportunities if you're getting a loan to negotiate the condition of the house. And the first is during the inspection contingency. And a seller, if a buyer asks for something that the normal buyer is going to ask for, the next buyer would ask for, the seller might as well do it for you. So I'm negotiating one right now where the smoke alarms are out of date. And we had high radon. We had 6.2 radon. We wanted to be under 4.0. So we have requested the seller fix the smoke alarms and put in a radon mitigation system to fix the fact that we have high radon. I fully expect the seller to do that. Now, they don't have to fix the radon. They do have to fix the smoke alarms. That's actually already in the contract, so that's an easy negotiation. But they don't have to do the radon. But if they don't do the radon for my buyer, the next buyer is probably going to want the radon done too. And now the seller has to disclose that there's high radon. And not every agent will recommend that their buyer test for radon, but I always recommend that my buyer test for radon. So that's a pretty easy ask for the seller to put a radon mitigation system in because the next buyer will also ask for it. But we didn't ask for a bunch of other things that were wrong with the house that we knew about. I also tell my buyers to think about what you have access to. If your uncle's an electrician, let's ignore all the electrical problems and let's focus on something that you don't have as easy access to. So sometimes that drives what we ask for in the repair negotiation as well. But keep in mind, we're not going to take the inspection report. We're not going to list everything out. We're not going to go through and do everything unless it's new construction. If it's new construction, or sometimes if it's a flip, sometimes, not always, but sometimes if it's a flip, then we can legitimately go through and put everything on the inspection report on the repair addendum. But in a normal transaction, the seller is going to look at, hey, if we don't do it for this buyer, well, the next buyer asks for it as well. And if the answer is yes, we might as well get it done for that buyer. Number 7, your lender that you choose as a buyer matters just as much as your agent. If I present an offer and I am presenting an offer and I can say to the listing agent, hey, they're pre-approved with my go-to lender. We always get to closing. We can close in 3 weeks. He's great. He's communicative. He's right here. Here's your pre-approval letter. And that lender calls that listing agent and says, hey, these buyers are great. Especially when that lender calls that listing agent like at 7 o'clock at night or on a Sunday afternoon and shows that they work the same hours that we as agents work, you are much more likely to get your offer accepted. If I have to say, here's the pre-approval from Rocket Mortgage, here's the pre-approval from a big bank in Ohio that doesn't know anything at all about our local market, and I'm not picking on Rocket Mortgage. Well, maybe I'm picking on Rocket Mortgage, but I'm mostly picking on the fact that if you're using a big online bank who promises you the world, we have learned, those of us who have been doing this a long time, we have learned that those promises don't always come true. I had a bank recently tell me, well, Jenny, we need to close in 48 days. Now, I don't exactly know where they got 48 days, but I was like, no. We already have a contract negotiated. We're closing in 29 days. And they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. I'm like, well, the way, my buyer got their offer accepted because we wrote an offer for 29 days. Well, sorry, Jenny, we need 48 days. So that doesn't work. My buyer had to go find a different lender in the end at that one. And so making sure you work with somebody who's local, somebody who's boots on the ground. It doesn't have to be the lender that your realtor recommended. It could be somebody your friend used or your brother used, but you want a recommendation. You want somebody who's trustworthy and honest. And honestly, the lenders that I work with every single day, it's just smooth. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to do their job. They don't have to do my job. I just know it's going to happen. If my buyers choose to work with somebody random, which of course sometimes happens, or maybe they had a relationship that I didn't know about, that's okay. That's perfectly okay. But then you as the buyer are responsible for making sure the lender is doing their job. I don't know if the lender's doing their job, right? And if you're not a local boots on the ground lender, the other thing I find is that they don't have relationships with appraisers, or more importantly, appraisal management companies. And then we get the weird dregs of the dregs appraisers and we have all sorts of additional problems. Whereas when we're working with a local boots on the ground lender, they have relationships with local appraisal management companies. We get the great, creme de la creme. Appraisers want to work for the local guys. They don't really want to work with the big online banks. So we get the good appraisers and we have less problems in the transactions also. So the lender that you pick is just as important as the agent that you pick. And do your homework, do your due diligence, and do your shopping before you ever write an offer. Because when we write an offer in Oregon, you are saying this is the lender I'm going to use. And if you want to switch lenders, you can if the seller agrees. And the seller doesn't always agree. Now, it's pretty easy for me to get a seller to agree to go from a big national, online bank to my local lender. That's not such a hard sell, right? But if you get your offer accepted because you're working with a good local lender and then you tell me you want to use a big bank, It is very hard to get the listing agent and the seller to agree to that because they know that lessens the chance of us closing, that extends closing often, and just things can happen and things are that way. So make sure that if you're going to shop your lender, you shop your lender before you write your offer. Number 8, contingencies protect you as a buyer. And as a buyer, you need to understand the contingencies that are in place. What contingencies are there and when are they going to expire? So part of that is, let's understand the contingencies. The number 1 contingency is seller property disclosures. In Oregon and Washington, the sellers are going to give you disclosures unless they are court appointed. If they are court appointed, then they are exempt from disclosures. If it is new construction, they are exempt from disclosures. But if it's a regular transaction, they're going to tell you everything they know about the house. Now, do you think sellers know much about their house? No, very seldom does a seller know anything about their house. I actually sold a house a few years ago, and the disclosures I got, and my buyers were super analytical. Engineers, analytical. And the disclosures I got said, do you have legal authority to sell this house? Unknown. Everything was unknown. Now, I don't usually call a listing agent out on that, but in this particular case, I called her and I'm like, hey, my buyers are going to freak about this because everything's unknown. And keep in mind, this seller custom built this house in 1987 and had been the only owner of this house. He bought the land and he built the house. So he probably knows a lot about the house, right? Nope. Unknown. And so the agent was so apologetic. And she's like, Jenny, I'm so sorry. I didn't read the disclosures before I sent them to you. I apologize. I should have. Let me call my seller. And she called me back and she was like, yeah, sorry. He's not willing to change it. He doesn't know how he would know for sure that he has legal authority to sell it. And that title will have to tell us if he has legal authority because he doesn't actually know. BS, whatever. It doesn't really matter what the disclosures say. That's my point. We want to do good due diligence as a buyer. We want to have good inspections and good due diligence. That's what we're going to focus on. But that seller disclosure period is a 5 business day period that is kind of a get out of jail free card. And it usually happens the first 5 days of the transaction. Most of the time we get those disclosures at the very beginning of a transaction. But they don't have to give us disclosures. In fact, in Oregon, the seller never actually has to give disclosures. But do you know what happens if the seller never gives disclosures in Oregon? The buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back all the way up until closing. So the seller is putting themselves at risk if they don't provide those disclosures. So it is obviously best practice as a listing agent. I always make sure I have those disclosures filled out ahead of time. I actually want buyers to review them before they ever make the offer, even though their 5-day period starts on mutual acceptance. And then that contingency goes the first 5 days. You also have an inspection contingency, and that is traditionally in Oregon 10 business days. In Washington, and we count differently, and so it starts with 10 calendar days, and then it's 3 and 3 and back 4 and 4. It just depends on how the contract's written. So you want to make sure you really understand how long your contingencies are for the inspection. Is that to have your inspections? Does that also include negotiating? In Oregon, it includes the negotiating. In Washington, it doesn't include the negotiating. And so you have to really understand that inspection contingency. Sometimes we shorten that inspection contingency, 7 days, 8 days. I can do pretty much every inspection that you as a buyer want to do in 7 business days and not have you feel rushed. So sometimes we'll shorten that because that will strengthen your offer. And that's a way to get your offer accepted without having to go up in price. So that inspection contingency is an important component. Now, you have to have an inspection to terminate based on the inspection contingency. And if you have an inspection and you terminate, the seller has the right to keep that inspection. So you want to think about that as you go into it. We have a relatively new thing in Oregon called a suitability contingency. And that suitability contingency will, generally speaking, mirror the inspection contingency. And that suitability contingency just lets you terminate for any reason, no matter what. And so you don't have to have an inspection. You could just say, I changed my mind. And so that is a way of getting out of it in the first week and a half-ish, 2 weeks, depending, without actually spending any money. In Washington, we call that a neighborhood review contingency. Generally speaking, it will also mirror the inspection contingency. So that contingency works. If you're getting a loan, you also have the financing contingency. And part of that financing contingency is the appraisal. Sometimes in competitive situations, we'll waive the appraisal component of the financing contingency. But that financing contingency, as a standard default, does include the appraisal contingency. You also have the title report contingency. Now, I don't care much about the title report contingency because we hardly ever terminate based on the title report contingency, but it is still an important contingency. And you as a buyer need to understand that there are CC&Rs, covenants, codes, and restrictions around the property. Are there some restrictions that are going to limit you in what you do? Maybe you drive a big ass truck for work and you can't park your big ass truck in front of your house per your CC&Rs. And so you need to understand that. So that's part of what is on the title report. The title report will also make sure that the seller can clear title. I sold a house last summer that the seller couldn't clear title. There were so many liens on it. I've actually never seen so many liens on a property. And so we had to dig through and make sure that all of those liens that should have on the property. Because did you know that if you own a house and you don't pay your credit card bills, they put a lien on your property? If you own a house and you don't pay your taxes, they put a lien on your property? My sellers didn't realize that. So they had a whole bunch of liens on their property. Now, at the end of the day, we got them all paid off. We got them all cleared. Everybody got to closing. We were great. But that title report contingency is a contingency in there. So seller disclosure, inspection, financing, suitability. Number 9, you are probably going to lose a house before you get the house of your dreams. This is a crazy market, and Murphy's Law says when you want a house, so does someone else. Now, that doesn't happen every time, but you might not get the first house that you make an offer on. And my advice to you is keep going. Keep trying. Listen to what your agent says about what you need to do. My goal is to get my buyers the opportunity to win if they want to win. Now, they don't always want to win. My buyers don't always want to win. Sometimes I say to them, hey, this is what it's going to take. But if you want to, I try to give you the opportunity so that if you want to win, you know you're competing, you know what we can do, you know your options, and then you get to choose whether or not you want to win. I had buyers miss out on a house about a week and a half ago, and we knew we were competing. Well, we knew we were probably going to be competing. And so I always use the same script with everybody, sellers and buyers. But with buyers, it's if you make an offer on the house at X and you don't get it because somebody else was willing to pay X plus something, you're okay with that because that was your highest and best. That was the best offer you were willing to make. So you as a buyer have to decide, what is the house worth to you? What makes sense to me? If I get it for this, if I get it for 1.8, 1.9, 650,000, whatever that number is, that's what it's worth to me. And if somebody else is willing to pay more, that's okay because it wasn't worth that to me. And sometimes that's hard when you don't win. And I will tell you that every single time, the house that my buyers get at the end of the day is always the right house. I really never have people be like, gosh, that house got away. That was the one. We always seem to find the one that is really, truly the house for them, the best option for them at the end of the day. But sometimes there's some heartbreak as you go through that process. Number 10, have representation. In Oregon and Washington, we can generally still get the seller to pay the cost of the buyer's agent fee. So if we can negotiate as part of the transaction, the seller to pay my fee, you should have representation. We do this all the time. Most people buy a house every 5 to 7, 11 years. It doesn't happen a lot, right? Whereas I help people buy multiple houses a month. Like this month, I think I'm going to close 9 buyers of my own. So I have a lot of experience, right? I can be a little bit more objective. I can step back and help you navigate it. That doesn't mean you always need representation, but my job is to tell you that you might as well have an expert on your side really helping you navigate all of these different parts and components and making sure that you understand that you're protected through the whole entire thing. Okay, that was a lot. Fabulous tips if you're buying a home. If you're interested and you have questions about buying or selling in Vancouver or Portland, reach out. I'd love to chat, DM me, let's connect. But remember, if you're thinking about buying anywhere in the US, I have a trusted network of advisors who can help you wherever you are. So just message me, let me know where you're looking, and I will connect you with the very best agent in your neighborhood. And don't forget, if you want to see more content like this, message me below. Let me know. Like, subscribe, follow us, turn on the notification bell. That really helps our channel grow. So have a fabulous day and let me know if I can help you with real estate.